Indeed, Molly, do continue to stay on with this. And Professor Kuznick, if I can bring you in here, just before Donald Trump, in fact, announced his ceasefire, when the American F-15 fighter jet was, in fact, shot down by the Iranians, it was, in fact, reported, the Iranians alleged, that the Americans appeared more intent to try and get closer to where they believed Iran had its 60% enriched uranium, rather than to try and rescue their fighter pilot. In your assessment, do you think the Americans could attempt another covert operation to try and get to Iran's enriched uranium?
Yes, they certainly could be doing that. They've got plans for doing that. But Donald Trump has shown an aversion to boots on the ground. Because if the Americans try to get in there at Isfahan and other sites, they are going to take heavy casualties. And the war is already so unpopular that if more American boys start coming home in body bags, then that little bit of support will be gone, and the Republicans will face even worse odds in the midterm elections. So his base does not want to see that, and his party does not want to see that. Does that mean that it won't happen? We don't know. Because right now, Donald Trump has two choices. One is to accept the Iranian terms, end the war, and walk away as the loser, no matter what he might say. The other is to escalate the war. It could go on in a status quo for a long time. The reports of late from the New York Times is that it could take the U.S. as long as 6 months to clear the mines from the Strait of Hormuz. That shocked people when that information, when the Pentagon testified to that. It might not take that long, but this election is in November, and people make up their minds long before that. And right now, there is a lot of strong opposition to almost everything that Trump has done. So one way or another, he comes out of this the loser, which doesn't mean that Iran is the winner. I mean, in a war like this, everybody can lose. And we're seeing the impact this is having on prices all over the planet. And the ones who are affected the most are the poorer people. So this is not a war that should have started or is in anybody's interest or is going to have a positive outcome. But there are bad outcomes and there are worse outcomes and there are nightmarish outcomes. The best we can do in this war is have a bad outcome.
But Professor, just to dwell on that point a bit more, Donald Trump would, of course, be looking at the various scenarios, and he'd be looking at a scenario where he can claim a definitive victory. And in his mind, some of his advisors would be telling Donald Trump that if he can extract that highly enriched uranium out of the Iranian hands, then that would, of course, make him look like a clear winner in this contest. In your assessment, the fact that the Americans moved their 82nd Airborne Division that can be airdropped for these highly specific and highly specialized operations, is this something that can be, logistically speaking and also technically speaking, is it possible that the Americans could go in from any of these facilities, Isfahan or some of the other facilities, and then get to 440 or 460 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium? Is it feasible, or is this just daydreaming?
It is possible, but it's very, very difficult and is fraught with danger. This is not a quick operation. This is not like going in there and seizing the Maduros and getting right out immediately. This would take days, if not longer. They've got to dig out deep into the ground. First of all, they don't know for sure where it is. Secondly, it's going to be very difficult to get down there to get it. Then it's very highly toxic and radioactive to try to transport that. There are so many ways in which this could go awry that that's why they haven't done it so far. That or trying to seize Karg Island. The Iranians are prepared. They've had weeks and they've had years, decades to prepare for this. And now they've refortified these areas. They know that this is a possibility. So I think it would be foolhardy. And up to this point, Trump has not been desperate enough to attempt it. As you're suggesting, maybe he's desperate enough now that the U.S. will try this, but the chances of it going well are slim, the chance of a disaster, I think, are much, much greater.
Now, one of the other aspects that not many people have spoken about, but this is something that is there as an undercurrent, the fact that the Iranians now say that they've got control of the Strait of Hormuz, and they'll, of course, want to charge a fee for all oil that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz. How badly do you think this affects the petrodollar, the goose that lays the golden egg for America's financial power?
A lot of the dealing for oil is already being done in Chinese currencies. China is not going to replace the U.S. in terms of the reserve currency globally overnight, but it's moving more in that direction. People have lost faith in the dollar. The dollar has been used punitively in sanctions across the world. Who sanctions everybody? It's always the United States that's sanctioning other countries. And we saw what Trump did with the tariffs. India saw it firsthand, what Trump was doing with the tariffs. But the whole world saw it. Even America's allies, the Europeans, were being brutalized with the tariffs. But the leverage with that has been largely eliminated. Even the Supreme Court ruled against Trump's tariff policies. Now they're trying to give that back. So the dollar is weakened, but what's weakened even more is America's moral authority. It might have been always based on a house of cards, but at least people around the globe thought that the United States was acting as a force for good. Now nobody believes that anymore. They see the U.S. as bullies. The Pope talked about tyrants. And America's alliances are very shaky. India, as a good example, had a certain amount of trust in the United States that it was going to behave responsibly. Now we don't see that anymore. We saw the moment in Beijing when Putin and Modi were holding hands and walked up to greet Xi Jinping. Means there's a new direction going on in terms of the way the world wants to see things go. They want to see peaceful development. The Global South stands for that. The African Union, the BRICS stand for this kind of peaceful development, not constant war. And the United States has been constantly at war and started another one that it now is desperately trying to extricate itself from. But if the United States is trapped, then it can lash out wildly in any direction.
Professor, finally, I want you to do the difficult thing, and that is to look into the mind of Donald Trump, who's a mercurial amongst mercurials. In your assessment, what do you think Donald Trump is thinking? Does he still believe that there is a military solution where he can get a military victory in this war on Iran? All right, we seem to have lost that line with Professor Kuznick there, but that, of course, is the question. What is in the mind of Donald Trump? Can one unspool the ideas that are streaming through the mind of the American president? Is he looking for an off-ramp? Is he looking for negotiations? Or is he looking for a military victory? That, of course, is the big question. So let's give you a quick wrap of what, of course, has been reported, where according to the Fast News agency, it's being indicated that the recent sound of air defense systems in Tehran and several other cities was in response to the presence of these micro drones and small UAVs, including the orbiter-type drones in several parts of the country. Reports, in fact, say that the sound of friendly fighters is related to air surveillance. So what's, of course, happening, we'll, of course, have to wait and watch. But this is a critical moment in this war. We'll continue with the updates. Stay tuned to WION.